You represent the 1/3, the elite, the select, the chosen few, the very best society has produced as of yet. You are the vanguard combating the idiocy that undermines the masses. You are the garrison, the bastion, the exalted of a lost generation. You are also the first and last line of defense for a new generation. The next generation of which you will be its primary influencers. You are the standard bearers of intelligentsia. If you have made it this far, it is because you have made the ultimate sacrifice to restore the vision of a blind and dying society. Meaning you have cut through a great deal of chaff to meet me here, where I, Cerulean Grey, am now conscripting you. Welcome to Fort Grey. Consider yourselves now operatives of the Grey regime. 2/3 policy is in effect. Welcome back, operatives. Today is your tactical intelligence briefing. The subject, high value and high payoff targets. In every successful campaign is found two basic principles, vigilance and focus. These are the two pillars of intelligentsia. By these two very integral principles, our entire nations destabilized by outside forces, and they are also the same principles by which nations are built and sustained. They are properly executed by asking one simple scientific question: cui bono? Who stands to benefit? Our esteemed brethren, the revered Dr. Amos Wilson, said, and I quote, "If you want to understand any problem in America, you need to focus on who profits from that problem, not who suffers from that problem." In fact, that very statement is so universal, it could be applied to any problem in the world. In the destabilization process, intelligence gathering is conducted as such. Identify high-value targets, high payoff targets, and in other words, identify those who benefit in society you intend to destabilize. And you persuade them, coerce them if you can, cause them to defect, or even go into a structured deal. In other words, bribe them. And if those avenues are exhausted, neutralize them as a threat by either elimination or undermine them entirely by publicly disgracing them. This creates an opening that you can exploit. What do I mean by that? Well, to give you an example, all you need to do is look at what the Me Too movement has done and is currently doing. However, we'll get to that shortly, but first, disclaimer, and I'll give it to you straight. If at any point in time over the course of this video you don't like the direction it is going, please fuck off, especially if you are colorblind, an interracial dater, swirler, rugged individual, coon, bedbug, bedwitch, Negro mockingbird who parrots white supremacist talking points, or a flying monkey of Oz, which distinctly and especially places you in the 2/3. This video will likely cause you to have some feelings of discomfort, shame, denial, or self-loathing, likely from realizing just how intellectually inadequate you are. So click off now to prevent any further damage to your fragile ego and or emotional state, or just stay and learn something that no mainstream educator within the Prussian school system will ever disseminate to you, because they are all terrified in fear of losing their tenure and their jobs. Well, that and they hate your fucking guts anyway, so lying to you is relatively easy. What are high value and high payoff targets? A High payoff target is a target whose loss to the enemy will significantly diminish the enemy's ability. High payoff targets are those of high value that must be acquired and successfully neutralized, persuaded, or conscripted for the success of your mission. Let's break this down. There are 9 areas of human activity. 1. Economics. 2. Education. 3. Entertainment. 4. Labor. 5. Law. 6. Politics. 7. Religion. 8. Sex. 9. Military. Now let's review a short history debrief on how we as black people were destabilized as a community. There were 3 primary pillars of structure that kept the black community stable and productive. Those pillars were military service, academic excellence, which encompasses education, political awareness and participation, which encompasses politics. That is until the idea of integration. As a countermeasure, blacks adopted a system developed by black men, specifically Martin Delany, which was entitled or called Black Nationalism, otherwise known as the pro-black ideology. In its simple mathematics, really, black man and black woman equal a unit for a family. Families equals a unit of community. A collection of communities equals a nation. Therefore, pro-black ideology, or to be pro-black, is also to be pro-black relationship, pro-black family, pro-black community, and pro-black nation. In the words of our esteemed and revered brethren, once again, Dr. Amos Wilson, who dropped so many jewels in his lifetime, he said, and I quote, "Only when you look at yourself as a nation can you change things." However, when the elements are disrupted, the first prime elements impeded or divided, i.e., black men and black women, all other elements that subsequently come after it that are all comprised of those first 2 primary elements will undoubtedly and inevitably fall apart. Thus, what you are currently seeing before your very eyes in this wedge driven between black men and women. The idea of black nationalism is to erect a black monolith with a focus on excellent black men, who would then be the interface to white society. Coming out of slavery and Reconstruction, the white man had unrestricted access to the black woman. During Jim Crow segregation, the white man's access to the black woman dwindled. Integration was a political ploy to return unrestricted access of black female bodies to the white man. Black nationalism was our attempt to establish ourselves as a singular socio-economic monolith and a socio-political entity. However, this effort was diverted by conscripted agent provocateurs to undermine black nationalism and transform it into a matter of civil rights, which was pro-integration. As a social-political counter-maneuver, black liberation theology transformed into a 3-pronged idea that we need to first restrict access white men had to black female bodies, use the political apparatus of the dominant society to gain resources and create opportunities for the next generation, which meant jobs for black men and upper education for black women. And the third was to monopolize existing apparatus such as agriculture, education, and industrial jobs, similar to what other groups such as the Irish did with the police and the Jews had done with civil service jobs. However, just as in the mythos of Judas betraying Jesus for 30 pieces of silver, did too the black educated elite, otherwise known as the black bourgeoisie, betray black people for 30 pieces of Popeye's chicken, when those great black men of renown disregarded the pleas of white society and those rugged individualistic deserters to cease and desist their effort to organize the Negro into a massive monolith. What did they do? They made them enemies of the state, an aggressive coercion tactic, and using the public's rather underdeveloped mental capacity to turn the public against those men. The black educated elite told white society that if they just threw in some butter biscuits covered in butter and adorned with great preserves, that they would be the ones to publicly disgrace those great men. And despite their efforts, those great men pushed on. And when all other avenues were exhausted, what did the enemy camp do? They assassinated those great black men. Why? Because they were high-value targets. During Reconstruction, the black family was in its infancy. We were just learning to become a self-productive people, which included oversight of our own family structure. We simply were not ready for integration. After destabilizing the black nationalist movement, what did they replace your leaders with? Their answer was feminism. What I call the Queen's Gambit maneuver, a change in social battlefield strategy. Therefore, when integration destabilized black society through the lack of black leadership, feminism and other social reforms seemed like a proper option for black women to take, since the legs had thoroughly been cut from underneath the black man. The current generation is the result of those actions. They identified the high payoff target, i.e. the black woman, so that they would stay true to the tenets listed down in COINTELPRO to prevent the rising of another black messiah who would lead blacks to become the new dominant force in this country. However, it was not until the 80s in which black women adopted this feminist idealism. However, through policy, specifically Title IX, they changed the environment around the black woman. First by economic suffocation of the black man, which subsequently suffocated the black female, destabilizing the black family, forcing her into economic destitution. And there is no greater or more convincing motivator for any species, no matter the gender, than a growling belly. They incentivized black women through the courts, through education, and the workforce, allowing her to make her own money in the absence of black men, to undermine the black man as an integral utility to family structure. Water seeks its own level, and when it does, it yearns to take the path of least resistance. Seeing how women were getting more social benefits, black women adopted a new type of culture, one in which focus on raising the women and loving the boys, because black mothers understood quite clearly that there was only the grave or the prison waiting on Junior. She coddled the black boy in her maternal instinct because she thought she was protecting him. In essence, a mother's love crippled the black male, which is why you see so many of these Negroes with mommy issues now. They thought they were protecting us. However, to a much greater degree, it was disabling us. While white women told black women they can do without their men, the white woman pushed her sons into white male-dominated spaces and structures, while black sons were pushed into female-dominated spaces and structures. Title IX had thoroughly transformed the environment and made it to which 80%, in fact 86% of K-12 teachers were in fact white women, usually led by a white male principal. Feminism was a shell game because privilege comes at the sacrifice of men, and white women understood this. And white women gained the understanding that if black women did as white women did, that black women's sons and grandsons would outpace their white sons, and her privilege would no longer be secure. Want to know where the Negro's affinity for white women stem from? Ask yourself, how many teachers in your child's school are white women? Sure, there will be some outliers who will not show any affinity for white women, even when surrounded by white people. However, the 80-20 rule does apply. Since men are more resistant to environment, the goal of feminism was to use black women as a platform in order for white men to have the path of least resistance open for them in their future generations, and using the white woman as a tool to open that path. And what was that path to? White male dominance. While the white woman was publicly appearing to be against her white male, she was actually pushing her sons into white male dominated spaces and structures, from the Cub Scouts to apprenticeships to police academies, and especially police forces, which is why even in majority black cities, most still have a majority white officers or a white police chief or commissioner to ensure that white males would not succumb to the effects of the social degradation white women were creating through feminism. And while white women were pushing their sons into white male dominated spaces and structures, specifically police and military, she was subversively working behind the scenes by pushing into legal apparatus to undermine black women by helping white males to push policies that would adversely affect black men, which made it easier for black men to be criminalizing him for everything, from slipping on a banana peel, to being homeless, to being jobless, false claims of rape, and since the rise of family court, criminalizing black men for having children. And today, nearly 80% of all family court judges are women, with 76% of them being white. The way feminism was sold to the black woman was fighting patriarchy. By increasing the black woman's economic upward mobility, they were told that inequality would become equity. This is a successful subversion and a successful persuasion. No coercion necessary, just a simple proposal that sounded mutually beneficial. However, consider this: if white women were truly ever fighting patriarchy, why do white women still lend themselves to work at jobs controlled or nearly 100% managed and ruled by white males? I mean, it stands to reason. The only possible way that you can work a job and gain an income is if the job that you do for that company generates more money than you're paid to work it. Therefore, the reality is feminism was a Queen's Gambit maneuver to create gender inequality in favor of white women in order to impede competing male groups from overtaking their sons. In the beginning of this briefing, I asked, cui bono, who stands to benefit? Of course, white women, which is why white women are the number one beneficiaries of affirmative action, which are the very jobs that white women pushed into and currently hold, isolate, and consolidate amongst themselves. However, who deployed these tactics? White male elites. Who else? White men who have been the greatest beneficiaries of not only feminism, but now in contemporary society, gay rights. Yes, feminism was a Machiavellian prince, or in this case, a Machiavellian princess. Yes, the Miss Anne syndrome personified. Therefore, brethren, I say unto you, where do you think black women get their bad attitudes from? The very women that you idealize, white women. That means as men, we have a great undertaking to reestablish the ideals and values that would allow for a new frame of reference to be formed in the minds of the next generation, so they would not so easily succumb and become vulnerable to the social apparatus that has degraded and diminished our collective quality of life. The social environment is filled with poison, and we've all been incubated in it and have been incubating our children in it. None of the current social illnesses that collectively affects us currently is our fault. To the contrary, it was an environment that we've all inherited. However, it is still our responsibility. Therefore, both black men and black women of this current generation, yes, you may be blameless until you hear this message, and now I can hold you accountable. And you must understand that the same thing that poisoned the previous generations is now poisoning us and poisoning the current generation, i.e. the millennial. We have not established a social, economic, or political apparatus that can compete with the monolith that you have given the moniker government. The intellectually lazy and the politically lazy thing to do is yell and advocate for cuts. However, it is an act of idiocy to take something away without having an alternative to fill the void. We can win. Victory is within our grasp, but it requires we be vigilant and maintain focus, not be overly distracted by low priority discussion. We have not done much collectively as of late because we do not act as a monolith. You must first reach the collective, organize them into a block, and power is yours for the taking. The most important battle in this ongoing war is the battle for the mind. When the Negro wins the battle for the mind, the Negro will do away with all non-constructive ideology and will crusade to ensure these false ideologies remain in the grave. Second most important battle is for uniformity, in which the Negro will crusade to undermine and or destroy non-compliers or coons, conspirators, and white supremacist sympathizers. These are the legs which white supremacy stands upon, and the Negro will benefit well from cutting those legs from underneath his enemies, at which point the Negro will have to choose a side. The Negro will either have to fall in line or be excommunicated. The third most effective and important battle is the battle for code, in which the Negro must enforce his own code of cultural uniformity. This is how the Negro will ensure that his subsequent generations are raised according to a cultural code unpolluted by the enemy's subversion, at which point violators of this code must be neutralized accordingly. This ensures the house remains intact and uncluttered by foreign idealism. Only after these steps are complete will you be able to execute a national agenda, which is your gateway to international influence, which is what maintains your cultural autonomy. You cannot move forward with anyone else who does not share your skin, cultural code, and mission, and they must possess all three. Or you will find the Negro once again in a 50s era civil rights struggle over and over again like a skip in the record of history. He who neglects what is to be done for what ought to be done sooner hastens his ruin than prolong his preservation. These are the words of Niccolo Machiavelli. Stop listening to those who tell you it's impossible, or tell you we can't do that, or that will never happen. These statements suggest fear and cowardice. These statements suggest that white supremacy is impossible to get rid of. These statements suggest that they have already given up. Anyone repeating these statements are giving you an open admission that they have fully absorbed white supremacist idealism. In the words of our esteemed brethren, BGS Ipmore, These statements suggest they have not defeated the biggest and most significant white supremacist threat in the Negro, and that is the one inside of themselves, just beneath the shallow facade of ego. And I quote, "Impossible is just a big word thrown around by small men who find it easier to live in the world they've been given than to explore the power they have to change it." And those are the words of our esteemed and revered hero, Muhammad Ali. You are a great and mighty people, and the fact that despite all efforts to wipe us out have failed, it is evidence not only of your genetic excellence, that is not only evidence of your genetic superiority, but your capacity to adapt and overcome any obstacle. Now, just as your ancestors, our ancestors, it is time that we form up and make this ship once again seaworthy. Next briefings will be related to operations, battlefield strategy, covering religion, a soldier in every home, the Great Faulkner Plan, and black devaluation, which is most important because we have males running around comparing themselves to females, which is problematic. When I first proposed the Great Faulkner Plan, I had a slew of feminine males ask me about what is my proposal to women. Not only is that an example of selective hearing, but it represents male nesting, which means they are derelict in their masculinity. However, you want me to make a proposal to women, I would ask them this. Ladies, if you would be so kind and gracious to let some of these feminine males borrow a few pads and a flavored Midol if you have any on hand. Otherwise, you feminine males can simply shut the fuck up and stop crying like a bitch. Moving right along, this concludes your briefing on high-value targets. In the meantime, stand by for further instructions. And with this, I impart permission for you to join the conversation. Like, share, comment, and subscribe, and be great. Salute to the nation. Cerulean Grey, over and out.
So,